All right, welcome to this new webinar topic that we have decided to get into on the topic of consumer debt. Oh, it's an ugly word, ugly phrase. In fact, that's even the word we've used to describe it, the ugly truth about consumer debt and how you can break free. It's posted by FTM Daily. That's ftmdaily.com. Follow the money daily on the web. And also, I'm joined by my wife, Jennifer Robinson. Jennifer, thank you for being here to help.
Absolutely. It's great to be here. I know that some of you may have heard me on the radio show. I've recently joined my husband and started being on the radio show, but it's great to be on the webinar as well. So hello to everyone.
And Jennifer is going to be monitoring all the comments and the questions. So as you find a question along the way, perhaps you think of something or you want to ask our special guest tonight a question, or myself or Jennifer, just type that into the question box right there on the right-hand side, and we'll be more than happy to address those. Jennifer will cut in every now and then and just bring those questions to our attention. I would like to now do the honors of inviting our guest and introducing our guest onto the webinar tonight. His name is Tom Coates. He's a faith-based debt coach, and I have to tell you, debt coaches and debt counseling, this is probably one of the strongest, most important pieces that we could ever add to Follow the Money Daily. You know, for a long time that we've been talking about precious metals. I know that we have told you a lot about stocks and about trading, and we've talked even a little bit about real estate, not as much, but we've talked a little bit about real estate. We've talked about multiple streams of income. We've talked about all these other topics that are very, very important. But many of you over the years have told us, you know, what we really need is to get out of debt. And I am so honored to have found someone who I believe has a high amount of credibility and a lot of integrity. And of course, you know, that's what I look for when I look for people who we bring to you. You can think of Tom Cloud and our gold and silver. You can think of Jay Peroni with stocks. You can think of John Burrs with insurance. Many of these names, these people are very high quality people. And I believe Tom Coates fits right in and is going to make an excellent addition to the FTM Daily roster. He brings a wealth of knowledge. He brings a wealth of experience in the debt coaching arena. And tonight we're going to be talking not just about the problems, because they're obviously immense, but we're also going to talk about the solutions. And he is going to be talking to you about how you can pay off your debt, things that you can do. And obviously, he does this for a living. So he's going to share with you exactly what he can do for you. He's offering a very generous offer tonight of 1 free hour of debt coaching to anyone who would like to have that. And so we're going to talk about all that. And I encourage you, as you're listening, feel free to write down questions and type those in. That's how this works here. And we'll see those, and we'll be sure to address those. We won't say your full name, so don't worry about that. You can even say, keep me anonymous. We won't even mention your first name if you don't want us to. It doesn't bother us at all. Just let us know how you'd like us to proceed. All right, well, let me introduce Tom Coates, Christian debt coach from Des Moines, Iowa. Is that where you're joining us from tonight, Tom?
That's right, Des Moines, Iowa, and we've had weather that would be the envy of anyone this winter. If this is global warming, send some more our way. We're in the 70s and 80s almost every day these days.
You know, I got introduced to you when I was up in Des Moines, Iowa, doing a Building True Wealth financial seminar at a beautiful church up there, and everyone kept talking about Tom Coates. Tom Coates, you got to meet Tom Coates. And you know, they thought very highly of you, and I see why, because you really are committed to helping people break free from debt, and you do so from a faith-based perspective, which is very key.
Yes.
When did you get into the business? Tell us about your practice. Tell us about what your heart is and why you feel such a calling to help people with debt.
I'm glad that you've asked that. In fact, on the screen it shows that we started the business. In fact, we're right at our 25th anniversary right now, Jerry. 1987, the spring of, is when I had my family down in Texas. I'm originally from Iowa, but I was in the investment field when I was a broker for Merrill Lynch most of those years. Got into it back in the 70s. Got into the areas that you were discussing, the areas of investment, stocks, bonds, commodity futures I did a lot with during the 70s and the 80s. So I've been on that side of it, and it is important. But what God opened up to me back in 1987 was an opportunity to move the family back to where our families were back in central part of Iowa, and to give people an opportunity to repay their debts. And almost daily, I'm given the satisfaction of seeing people come through after getting their finances in order, working through their budgets, repaying their debts over a period of time with some assistance, and becoming almost a new person. And the satisfaction and legitimate pride that they feel in what they've been able to accomplish is very gratifying. And it's the intangible part of this business. I know the screen says we've helped well over 100,000 families during that period of time, and each one of those is an individually unique and wonderful story.
Interesting. So you've been doing it since 1987. What have you seen change since 1987?
Well, some of the...
We only have an hour, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. Some of the screens that, in fact, what we've used on some of these screens that we're going to are some of the PowerPoints that I use. Oftentimes I will do presentations to various groups, church, civic organizations. I talked to a group of about 600 students at Drake University here in town a while back and used this same PowerPoint. And aspects of the growth in that consumer debt market are, I think, important for people to understand where we have come from. If we use, Jerry, 1987 as the starting point, the year that I and my family started consumer credit, you will see that the average person had 2 to 3 credit cards. The average line on that bank card, that MasterCard, and that Visa was about $2,000. There was $100 billion in total credit card debt outstanding, revolving, people were paying interest on.
Oh, that's chump change now, isn't it?
Yeah, but I could see the trend lines. I did not understand the magnitude of that increase, and from that point to where it topped out in 2008, we went from the average person having 2 to 3 credit cards to the average person having 8 to 10. The average line on that bank card was no longer $2,000, but was between $5,000 and $6,000. The amount of total debt that was outstanding when it peaked out in 2008 went from $100 billion to right at $1 trillion, so a tenfold increase. And the amount, as it impacts, $1 trillion we throw around, as you say, like chump change today, Jerry. One of the slides shows what $1 trillion looks like. Can we advance to that slide?
Yeah, let's go ahead and move forward here and take a look here. Also, before we go forward, Tom, I do want to show them that they can look you up on the web, ChristianDebtCoach.org. This is the website that you'll see. That's Tom right there. Is that your handsome face right there with the cowboy hat?
That was we've done about 40 TV commercials over the years, Jerry, and that was done about 10, 12 years ago, so I may have put a few wrinkles into that face since then, but it was a good theme at that point, and it was an idea a little off the Kenny Rogers, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and we played, I and a guy that was nearly 7 foot played poker with credit cards, and I beat him, and he had to leave the table, and that was the theme of that particular TV commercial. It's kind of become one of our logos.
Well, you're dating yourself there, Tom, with that. But now, when you come on to ChristianDebtCoach.org, in essence, what you do, you see this big button right here. Let me get my highlighter out so I can just show you this. You hit this button right here, and what happens, Tom? We'll get into this a little later, but real quickly, what happens?
All right. It takes them to a place where they can either online fill out the information sheet that gets the income, living expenses, and listing of debts in some detail. And you're right, we will. There's some other slides later I want to show them how they can actually, even if they don't want to do anything else, give them a format where they can start to get a better handle on their basic finances. And I'll tell you, there's not many people out there that don't think in surveys that they can do a bit better job of handling their personal finances. They may not need our help. They may not have that much debt, but handling their budget better, understanding the money coming in, what's going out, how they can better organize it is vitally important to almost everyone.
This phone number up here as well, is that, I guess that's manned Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 Central Standard Time. Is that right?
Yes. In fact, we have people until 6. In fact, I'm in the office right now, Jerry, and I've got across the way, I've got a couple of counselors doing some evening counseling. So
Wow.
one of them's on the phone, one of them's got a person live in the office. So we do evening counseling as well. But when they click on that, they can either fill it out online and send it to us online, or they can download it, fill it out by hand. If they're old-fashioned like I am, they're more comfortable with a pen and paper in hand, and they can fill that out, and they can mail it, they can fax it, they can scan it and re-email it to us. There's a number of means of transmission, but we try to make it as easy for them as possible.
Okay, there is a slide up right now showing the U.S. bankruptcy filings. This is only up to 2008, and they've skyrocketed since. But
they have come back up. Yeah, they have.
Yeah.
Now that spike, Jerry, that you see where it shows over 2 million, that was a change back in the '05 period where they changed the bankruptcy laws. That was kind of an aberration. You can see the sharp decline into '06 after that. And again, that's a bit of an anomaly because of the change of bankruptcy laws. They made it more difficult. They made it more expensive. They required counseling, which I think that was good. We do about 100 pre-bankruptcy counseling sessions a month. I don't seek them out, don't advertise for them, but they come in through a lot of the local attorneys that want us to help their people.
Right.
And now we've come back up to what was the pre-law change back in '03, back up to about 1.5 million personal bankruptcies.
And that's something. It is. That's something. I mean, it is. That's really hard. And in those numbers, they don't really tell the tale. I mean, I can't even imagine. I've never experienced bankruptcy, but I know you see it on a consistent basis, and it's not just a number, and it's not just something that you do or a paper you file or something that it's actually, it impacts your life in such a strong way. And I've seen many people who just have never quite recovered from it because they feel so ashamed because they filed bankruptcy, or they feel so destitute, or they feel like they're no longer the same. They're half the man they used to be, so to speak. I mean, it really does a number on their psyche.
There's no question. Now, I will say that if some of the stigma that formerly was associated with it has been removed, but there's still that defeatism for a lot of people. They just do not want to do it, and they will do almost anything they can to keep away from filing the bankruptcy. One of the things that I lobbied hard for with congressmen and some senators and in front of panels and so forth was, for years, people were filing bankruptcies in large numbers and increasingly large numbers, and they were not learning anything. Within 2 to 3 years, they were back having serious financial problems again, racking the debt back up. And the counseling requirement before they file, and then an education requirement prior to the discharge, I think has stemmed some of that and has made people step back and realize where they came from, why they got themselves into trouble, and perhaps to change some of their behavior. At least it's a step in the right direction. You can see on the next chart the household debt going back, again, almost to the point that I mentioned to you, '88 to 2008. Now, this is total household debt, not just focusing on the credit cards, and it's based in trillions of dollars, going from 3 to almost 14 trillion in that same time frame. And we have deleveraged in the last few years. I will say this, and some people will take some solace from this. We have gone from where I said right at $1 trillion on just the credit cards, now down to about 800 billion. So we've seen 20% come down. We have seen, for the first time in our recent history, in the last 60 years, we've seen 2.5 years to 3 years of consistent consumer debt paydown since the peak in late '08. That's never happened in the 60 years of credit expansion that we've seen. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. My crystal ball's not cleared up enough, but it is not just a little hiccup, and it isn't just a minor recession that some people would have us believe. I'm like you. I do believe in the destruction of the currency and trying to protect yourself, but I do think that we're entering into a time that is not like something that we've seen in our lifetimes.
Yeah. And looking at this household debt, I mean, I think the most recent numbers were the 14.3. I can't remember the exact number I saw just the other day when I go through these numbers and these reports. And I think many people don't realize that the total household debt, is flirting with the total U.S. national debt. They're totally different things. So this is just the household debt.
Yeah, and we're going to show, I think, here in a minute, a couple of charts that kind of illustrate just what you're talking about, Jerry. Let's move on from the household debt one to show your audience what $1 trillion really looks like. This is important, ladies and gentlemen, because I heard my own senator today talking about this money like it doesn't really have much meaning. And Senator Tom Harkin, I hesitate to say, is one of my 2 U.S. senators, and he was proposing even more spending and just higher taxes. But we throw away millions and billions of dollars, and we don't really understand. Here's a visual to help you understand. Here's a stack of $100 bills or $10,000 in front of the fellow on your screen. 100 of these stacks would equal $1 million, and 10 pallets of 1,000 stacks of $1 million equals that $1 billion you see in front of you. Now that is, I think most of us, a staggering amount of money, but when we go from that B word to the T word, here's what it looks like, and it's dramatic. So this is what $1 trillion really looks like. It says, hey, I'm down here. Notice these pallets are all double stacked, otherwise they wouldn't fit on this slide. Now I know there's a lot of ways to illustrate what $1 trillion looks like, but this times 16 is what the national debt is. And Jerry, I have seen some surveys and some studies done. They believe that something in the area of $70 to $80 trillion is the amount that is not properly funded and yet is now required of us for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, to say nothing of the, just this week actively debated newest entitlement called Obamacare. This is a staggering amount of money, folks, when you multiply it out. And when you figure that we are looking at about 100 times what's on that screen in total amount of public debt, it comes down to about $300,000 per every man, woman, and child in this country, which is not something that can be properly repaid. And that's when you flip over, Jerry, and you start talking about the destruction of the currency and what they're really doing. If we look at the comparison, and this is also kind of a coincidence, this chart that I'm showing you here, 1954 is the year, I'll give away my age, Jerry, this is the year I was born. And if we look at the comparison of the actual government spending with amount needed to keep pace with inflation, the red line would be spending to match inflation and population growth, and the blue line is the actual government spending running up until 2008. And at that point, you can add about another 15 to 20% on top of that since that chart was put together. It's a staggering amount. And when we talk about the occupiers being concerned about Wall Street, they really ought to march right on up to Washington, D.C., because the problem is with the growth in the federal government. It is choking us out, and the weeds are multiplying quickly.
Wow. Yeah, and that's
that's kind of sobering.
Yeah, I got to throw this in, the fact that, you had mentioned the unfunded liabilities that we have going out to 2040 or whatever it is. And, I'm researching my book, Bankruptcy of Our Nation, right now. I'm kind of revising it and everything. And the number that I saw was closer to $118 trillion, just going out to 2040. Those
now,
numbers.
Does that count to Obamacare, or is that with or without Obamacare?
No, that's that's just Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and then of course all of the the current
the normal deficit spending that we do.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
we can laugh about it because we're going to cry otherwise. It's just a staggering sum.
Well, it makes you wonder if who owes that money. I mean, it's not Obama, right? It's not Washington. I mean, you and me.
No, it's not coming from the Obama stash, is it?
Yeah, no. I mean, he doesn't have a secret visa to pay it off. I mean, we gotta cough this money up ourselves, which makes the point. If I were to call into Dave Ramsey's show and scream I'm debt free, am I really? How can I really be debt free in a land that owes so much money?
No, you're not. And you know what the Federal Reserve, you're doing the research and you're into this, so you know, but I will just say that I blame a lot of this on Alan Greenspan. He was the Federal Reserve chairman coming in after the rock-ribbed Paul Volcker that kind of set this thing in motion. He knew better. He was a hard money guy. He was he understood the issues, and he was brilliant. And yet he traded that in. It's just like we read in the Bible all the time how people are compromising their own integrity and everything about them for what the world has to offer. Well, the devil offered Jesus the world. He said, you know, come worship me, and this has all been given to me. I am the ruler of the world, and I have the ability to give you these things. Of course, Jesus made the right choice, but so many of us being weak, we do give in. And Alan Greenspan is a classic example. Cheap money, artificially low interest rates, and the pumping of the money supply created bubbles. And the most destructive one hit in after the high-tech bubble burst in the year 2000. We immediately started rolling that money into the real estate market, and the devastation there was dramatic, and we still not have all the impact felt yet.
Mm-hmm. So true.
So,
speaking of, we have these foreclosure filings right here up on the screen.
Yes, yes, and again, they're trying to do everything they can to soften the blow. It would have been better had they gone through and let the market sort itself out. But again, when you have bureaucrats and politicians that make a living on trying to control your destiny, letting the market sort itself out is not in their vocabulary.
Sure. Here's a slide of the personal savings rate. I remember when this thing actually went to zero. Was it back in 2005? Yeah.
The chart doesn't properly and accurately do it, but I've seen other studies, and you have too, Jerry, that in 05, 06, 07, and part of 08, we actually were in negative areas of personal savings, where we used to be consistently around 7 to 8%. I will say, just like the paying down of some of the consumer debt in the last few years, we've also seen a return to more realistic 4, 5, 6% annualized rate of savings. Now, whether that stays, people did get the message. They got the message they ought to start paying down their debts, and they ought to start saving money again. So a more recent reflection, and I think in the charts to come, we can see some of that reflected in the charts that hopefully will pop up here in just a second. Moving past the personal savings rate, here's gross private savings, Jerry, and this is illustrate the point. You see where the thing took off in 08 and people started saving again. This is from the private sector now. Mm-hmm. And if you contrast that with the next slide, gross government savings, you will see the government's response to what's happened. Their response has been what the Japanese response was, and that was to spend money they didn't have. Now the nation of Japan is the most heavily per capita industrialized country as far as a debt picture that you can have. 20 years of artificially trying to stimulate the economy with borrowed money, and they're no really better off than they were 20 years ago, and that's the route that our government's chosen to take. I guess we probably ought to move through this, but it's just striking to me how our government is spending money. You're not willing to, Jerry. You're trying to pay your debt down. You're trying to be responsible, and you've got the Washington bureaucrats spending money in your name. And so back to your question earlier, am I really debt-free? No. But we can only do what we can do. Try to elect more responsible politicians and hold them accountable. That may or may not happen, but what we can do in the meantime is try to get our personal finances in as best shape as we can, getting the debt paid down, and then eventually moving to where you want to take them. Hard money savings, real estate investments, some stock market investments if you can find the right ones. Those are all good options, and timing is always very important, because I'm talking to people all the time, as I know you are. They thought they were making some smart buys in the mid 204, 205, 206 on some real estate, only to see it collapse out from under them and really not stabilize yet. So,
yeah, no doubt about it. And here we have a slide showing the savings rate versus the interest paid. We call the debt penalty. I have a quick question, because as I sit here and I see this savings rate, one of the things that we preach over and over again here at FTM Daily is the idea of saving 15%, and we call it the profit principle, because if you don't actually save any money, then you're really working for zero profit, because the savings rate that you have is technically your profit rate. It's the same way a company. I mean, what the company puts away is what they consider their profit, their earned profit. And so an individual who's out there who's working, if he earns a paycheck and then turns around and gives all of the money and sends it out to, Dillard's and JCPenney and the local gas station, and then gives it away to, Walmart and all these other places. What they're doing is they're working for the corporations. They're working to prop up the corporations. And so what we teach people is that if you're not saving anything, then you're working for a zero profit rate. That's absurd. Nobody would do that in real life. But they do it because it seemed, well, that's my question. Why do they do it? You've been doing this.
Well,
you've been doing this 25 years. Why do they do this?
Well, they're not intentional enough about what they are doing. Let's go back to the overall. I've had people come up to me, Jerry, over the years, and because they see my face on TV a lot, at least in this area, not nationally, but in this area, they'll come up and they'll sometimes want me to know that they have credit cards, but they keep them paid up in full at the end of every month. The reality is that when they do a survey, and this goes to the disconnect on the surveys, when they do a survey, they show that 2/3 of the people will tell the surveyor that's how they use their credit cards, but the reality is that 60% do not. And of the 60% that do not, that 60% is revolving a balance today of close to $8,000 just on their credit cards. That's aside from home mortgage, car loans, student loans, medical debts, and those kinds of things. And so what you've got is people that either delude themselves into thinking that, no, I'm pretty much debt-free, I'm doing all right, or they are denying the reality. Now, you can also argue that the fact that many people have not seen any real income gains in the last few decades,
yeah,
when you index it for inflation,
that's true,
that they are trying to keep up with a standard of living that is increasingly unaffordable. Now we've got a job market soft as it is. Many people can't get the second jobs, the overtime. They may have lost a better paying job and now finally have to take a lower paying job. And their credit cards make up the difference for a period of time. And they're not being intentional enough to understand what we're going to get to, that they need, whether you're government in Washington, a state government, a municipality, or an individual, you need to live within those means. It sounds so simple, but it's obviously not for many people that are trying to balance a lifestyle that is simply, in many cases, unaffordable. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute in regards to the individual counseling session. I'd like to move through the next couple of slides, just comment briefly. If you wonder where the real estate market really peaked out, actually it was in the summer of '05, even though the effects weren't felt for a couple of years later. But that's actually when most of the research will show you where the market actually peaked out, and it was a while before the people figured that out. In 1995, you can see on the next slide that most houses were affordable. There were two types of people who got themselves in trouble on real estate in the period from the mid-'90s to the mid-2000s. One type of person was trying to speculate. The real estate market was jumping so fast, they tried to move at a speed that would put them in a position where they could speculate and use their house, so they'd leverage themselves out, very little money down. And when that thing finally busted, when all bubbles eventually burst, they were caught, and the bigger sucker theory did not work. The other type person, and this was very easy, the commercials were out there. Everybody was trying to push money at you. If you're a homeowner, we're wanting to loan you money, in some cases 120% of the value. Credit worthiness was not a big issue, and they didn't do the due diligence in regards to the underwriting. I remember a woman calling me and saying, "Mr. Coates, I want to borrow $20,000 against my home, pay off my credit cards." She said, "It sounds like a good idea to me. What do you think?" And I said, "What interest rate?" And this was some years ago. And she said, "Well, I don't have the best of credit. They wanted to loan it to me at 15%. So it's kind of high." She said, "Yes, but still it's less than my credit card interest rate." I said, How many points? 1 percentage point of the amount borrowed is called a point in real estate lending. And she said, "Well, again, I don't have the best credit. They told me not to worry about it. They're going to wrap it into the loan. They're going to charge me 6." I said, "That's very high." And I said, "You have a first mortgage?" She said, "Yes." "Have a second mortgage?" "Yes, I do." "How long have you had the second mortgage?" She said, "About 2 years." I said, "I've got one more question, then I'll answer yours." I said, "When you took out the second mortgage 2 years ago, what did you use the money for?" She said, "I used it to pay off all my credit cards." And I said, bang. Here's a microcosm of something going on all over the country. They're using their house like a big ATM machine, and anytime they want something, they're putting it on their credit cards and then rolling it off eventually against the house. And that also had disastrous consequences. So you can see by '05, much of the housing in this country was severely unaffordable.
Hmm.
Let's move past this one. I don't want to get too bogged down in some of this. I want to get moving into the area where the individual can say, okay, this really can pertain to me. First off is this idea, and Jerry, there was an author that I read along with Larry Burkett when I first started the business 25 years ago, and he was also a Christian financial author named Ron Blue.
Oh, yeah.
And he wrote a book that I used in setting up the business back 25 years ago, and one of the things that he said was there was a survey clear back then that showed that if you used a credit card to make a purchase, you would spend 32% more on that purchase than if you used cash or wrote a check. And so oftentimes when you wonder, and your audience I'm sure has had these experiences as I have, you walk into the store, you make a purchase, you go up to the counter, you're going to buy it, and they say, do you want to save 10 or 15% on your purchase today? All you have to do is take out this application for a credit card. And you say, well, I'm not interested. Why? Are you stupid? Don't you want to take out this credit card and save money on your purchase today? You think, unless you look into it, that their motivation is primarily to get you in there, charge balance up, and earn interest. There's more going on here than just trying to make some interest, because in recent years the amount of profitability for these credit card companies has been nil. With their large losses, they've had billions of dollars in losses on their credit card portfolios. What they do know is this, that if you take the plastic, you become a more loyal customer, and you will spend more when you come back into that store with their plastic than you would have if you'd written a check or paid cash. So there's more going on than just trying to make interest, and that, I think, is important for your listeners to understand some of the dynamics behind what they think is a little bit of an annoyance at the checkout counter.
Yeah, and I know that I've even talked to some people who say, well, I use my credit cards, and I get the credit cards because it makes it convenient for me, but I always pay off the balances at the end of every month. And you're saying that while that's very well-intentioned, that technically there's a psychological effect of using plastic. I know that's true. When I have to break out the cash, it hurts. Whenever I have to whip out the checkbook and write a check, I hate spending money, but whenever you break out the plastic, it's so easy. It's so easy.
That's exactly right, and that's what this illustration is showing, the credit card trap. $5,000 charged. In fact, I will confess that I'm getting ready to take my whole extended family, kids and grandkids, down to Disney World here about another month or so. And if we took that trip and we put everything on a credit card, in fact, I'm not sure $5,000 is going to get the job done.
I doubt it.
Anyway, at 20%, if I had a smaller family, perhaps even mine.
Yeah. Just you and the wife.
Grandkids. Yeah, I've got 6 grandkids and 3 kids, so it's going to be a little pricier than that. But anyway, 20% interest, $100 a month minimum payments, and at the end, if you just put the card away, never use it again, you keep the payments flat. Instead of as the debt amortizes, you could start to drop that payment. You leave it flat at $100. Takes you 9 years to repay. Ugh. At the end of that time, you pay off the $5,000 that you borrowed and $5,800 in interest. And what do you have to show for it? In my case, some pictures, some nice memories, but you have put yourself into a position of servitude. And the Bible talks about this. Solomon wrote back thousands of years ago that the borrower becomes the servant or the slave of the lender. And I tell audiences that was true then. It is true now. You do not change human nature, and though our mechanical abilities and our technological advantages give us the ability to do it in lightning speed with technology never dreamed of in prior generations, the effect and the process and the reality is all the same. You have put yourself into a position of servitude for, in some cases, whims. That's what the credit cards let you do. Instead of the cooling off period, instead of putting the money aside and planning for those purchases, you're doing it quickly. And that is probably one of the biggest psychological things that you need to understand. And that's why the credit cards, though a great convenience, and I'm not telling you not to have them, they can be very deadly to your financial health, and you have to be very careful how you use those cards.
Yeah, very good. Let's see. Let's throw up this here. This shows another example of minimum payments. You want to talk about this one?
Briefly, what it shows is that let's say that some of the members of the audience are in this position, maybe not to the point, maybe we'll get into the counseling, but let's say that all they've got is that $1,000 balance at the top, and all they're doing is making minimum $20 a month payments. In the one case, the one that has shown 20%, the other 23% interest. If you just double that payment, go from $20 to $40, see how much you cut that down. Instead of the 9 years I showed on the prior slide, you're down to under 3. And instead of the cost being over $3,000 on the interest on the one, you're down to $1,300, and the savings are pretty dramatic. And so the difference in whether you can pay just a little bit more and accelerate the payment on that debt may make a lot of difference time-wise, and really we're getting closer to that point. That's one of the real benefits to our service, is this significance, in some cases, reduction on the interest rates on these cards, and I'll get into more of that in a few minutes.
Yeah, Tom, I remember hearing a long time ago, and I don't know, maybe you can confirm this, that whenever I'm talking about houses now, you take out a mortgage, and the mortgage company always says, don't make the first payment, just keep it, you're busy and all that stuff, use the money for the furnishings, and then just pay us when the bill comes in. But I heard from an astute real estate investor, they said, if you will go ahead and pay that first payment on your mortgage whenever you first get a mortgage, it actually reduces dramatically the cost, because it all goes to the principal. Is that a true statement?
Sure it would be. And on a real estate mortgage especially, unlike the short-term stuff that we're talking about or the car loan that we're about to touch on, the real estate mortgage typically is taken out for 15, 20, 30 years. And early reductions of principal, just like early savings for investment, retirement, and those kinds of things, are very important dollars. And so, getting on a jump on a principal reduction early on a long-term obligation is obviously very impacting. It doesn't matter so much if you do it at the very end, but it makes all the difference in the world if you stick some money in early.
That makes sense.
Let me talk for a minute, Jerry, about the second, besides credit cards, the second biggest thing that we see people doing and making a mistake on, and I think this is very, very important, is these car loans. Now, the illustration on the screen shows a $20,000 car with I see the P is missing, annual percentage rate of 9% interest. On a 5-year loan, we're looking at that thing paying $415 a month, paying $24,000 out over the course of a loan. And that is normal. But 30, 40, 50 years ago, the average car loan was not, 5, 6 years as it is today. It was, back in the 70s, the average car loan was paid off in 36 months. And that was not a big problem for most people, because by going, and when I would do one-on-one counseling with some of these people, I would say, and they were already in real trouble with the car, I say, what happens if you step back and instead of the 5-year loan that the car salesman told you that everybody does, what happens if you'd taken a 36-month loan out? And they look at you like you're crazy. Well, I couldn't afford the $415. How could I afford the $636 a month? I say, bingo. You couldn't afford that car in the first place.
Right.
Understand that you were sold a bill of goods. They stretched the financing out long enough that you thought you could afford it. The reality wasn't. And by doing it this way, in the first couple years with very little money down, nearly everybody becomes upside down on their car. And I've had people, Jerry, they've come in for counseling that in some cases, we have a lot of deer up here. I don't know about you down there, but we have a lot of car deer accidents. And in some cases, I've seen people come walking in here without a car. The car's been totaled out. The insurance company's ready to write them a check, or in this case to their lender, but the car was worth less than what the amount borrowed against it was. And I've seen people come through my doors with thousands of dollars in car loans and no car to show for it because they were upside down. So this is a hazard. And, of course, you get yourself in a position, you lose your job, or a number of things happen where you simply can't make the car loan payment anymore. That upside-down condition translates into many thousands of dollars in a deficiency balance, and it's a dangerous situation. The flipping this over, and this is the way to look at it. the next time you go out to buy a car, and if you're not in a position where you can pay cash for it and you're going to have to borrow, plug the numbers into your budget. You shouldn't spend more than 15 to 20% of your take-home income for transportation, and you plug that 36-month loan. Instead of that 20 or that 30 or that $40,000 vehicle, you downsize it. You look at a little cheaper car, but you pay it off in 36 months. You're not upside down in that period of time. You identify what's affordable, and at the end of the time when you get the car paid off, now you start plugging the money into a reserve fund for the eventual replacement of that depreciating asset, and at some point, then you become the lender yourself. You're taking yourself out of the position of servitude that King Solomon wrote about thousands of years ago, and you're putting yourself into a position that now you're in the driver's seat, and you are going to be paying cash, and you're going to be buying cars that are affordable. You're going to be maintaining them, and you're going to take a lot more intentional attitude towards the car buying than keeping up with the Joneses next door and every few years getting a new one and staying in perpetual car debt with the danger of being upside down and having that come back to haunt you big time.
Yeah, the Joneses are broke, by the way, for those who are trying to keep up with them.
They are.
They're broke.
It looks good from the outside. You don't want to see it from the inside. That's right.
All right, so
that's a big deal, and if there's any questions about car financing, I'd be happy to take those. I want to make sure that any of your listeners that had questions on car financing understand that before we move on.
Got it. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to type those in. I know many of you are probably just sitting here listening to this, enjoying this, because this is good information. Some other strategies are on the way. How about this slide here, Tom? Is this a duplicate, or is this something else?
This is a little different spin. How much monthly car payment can you really afford? And this goes into a graph showing the gross income per year. You can see it starts at 25, it drops on down ultimately to 115,000. Net spendable income off of the gross. There's an assumption there made on taxes and so forth, and net spendable income and then the car payment. And so what we're trying to do in this is to keep you into a percentage of your total income starting out. Of course, the point is here, you wonder why the guy making $25,000 has to look at 7.5%, the guy at $115,000, 6.5%. Well, practically speaking, if you're not making so much, you're going to have to spend a little higher percentage of your income on this particular item. You're going to perhaps have to scrimp on discretionary spending, but getting a car and getting to and from work and around isn't a luxury, but the kind of vehicle that you drive can or cannot be affordable, depending upon what you choose. So that's what that thing's about. Let's get past the payday lenders. I suspect most of your listeners and viewers here will understand the hazards of that kind of 300% and 400% annualized borrowing. This is one of the things I show, especially try to hammer it into the younger audiences that I speak to, Jerry. At 25, if you start putting just $2,000 a year away and earning an annualized return of 8%, at 65, you'll have over $600,000. And just like we talked about a minute ago, those early dollars into a long-term mortgage with principal pay down has long-term significant consequences. But look what happens if you wait till you're 35. And I've been both 25 and 35 with young families, and there's always reasons that you don't want to necessarily start putting that $2,000 a year away. But if you wait till you're 35, the same $2,000 plugged into a retirement program earning the same rate of return will pull out $266,000 and change at 65.
Less than half.
Which is a long, you can see how much difference there is just with those early dollars. And I try to emphasize, if you start, well, if you're a young person, maybe you're coming out of high school, just getting out of college, and as soon as you can, start plugging into a retirement program. Many of them have programs that there's some percentage that's matched. That's like a bonus. You don't want to pass that up. And I tell the younger generation, 65 is not going to work for you. I said when 65 was established back in the 30s under FDR for Social Security, the average person didn't live to be 65. And if they did make 65, they normally didn't make it much past there. And now, of course, we're seeing people live well into their 80s and 90s on a matter of course. And if medical technology is allowed to advance, without the hand of government moving in and controlling it, we could see people living well into their hundreds in the next generation on a regular matter of course. So 65 retirement is not going to work, and therefore $2,000 plugged a year into a retirement program will earn eventually well over $1 million without much trouble at all. Now, you come back and ask the question, is that $1 million going to be worth anything? And there's a lot of jokes about the cost and the destruction of the dollar. And then you can get into your area, Jerry. You can talk to them about ways that they can actually preserve the buying power of their money.
Right. That's good. That's good. Here's a budget sheet. This is something from your company. I guess, is this available for them to download?
This is going back to that early slide that you showed on our website. If you click here to get help now, it will take you to an area. One of the areas it can take you to is this budget sheet right here. And this, even if they didn't want to take the next step and do the free hour of counseling and so on and so forth, they just wanted a format where they can get their finances in order. This is where you want to go, right here. Something like this, where you can lay out your income in detail, and we use net. We try to get off of what their gross is, and we try to get down to a net. Then we go into the areas of the creditors. The inside portion is the part about the creditors, and we list out who you owe, how much you owe, try to get that organized. And then the last section on the sheet goes into the budget. And I will tell you and the listeners that this is where much of the time the counselors have to spend is spent, because oftentimes there are things on this budget sheet, and I do want to spend a few minutes highlighting a few. If you're going to go through your budget, these are some things that you need to be mindful of, and the counselors would take time pointing out to you. You get into housing, and certainly most people know what their rent or their mortgage is. That's fairly simple. Utilities, that's not hard to ascertain, and you come in with an average utility bill. Water, trash, phone, cell phones, internet, those things are all in this category. The one that is generally often missed is this one marked home maintenance and repair. Do you see it there?
Mm-hmm.
There, Jerry's highlighting it for you. All right, that one, for anybody like myself and many of you probably on the line that are homeowners and have been for a while, you know that when you start thinking about it, there's a cost to home ownership that oftentimes isn't reflected. Maybe last month my water heater went out. I'm going to have to paint the house this year. I got a broken window in my, I've got to cover it with my deductible. There's a lot of things that go on for a homeowner that need to be taken into account and generally aren't. And that's where, let's say you've got the water heater broken down and the window breaks, and you're going to have to pony up for some new paint this year. It's just looking a little too ratty, and you spend that $1,000 this year or more on the house. Where'd the money come from? Did you lay it aside, or did it get put onto the credit card and you said, well, this is an emergency, the water heater just broke and I don't have any money laid back for it? Then out comes the credit card, and there you are. And there are other items here too. Automobile expenses. Certainly gas is a big one these days for a lot of people. Licensing, insurance, and so forth. But the oil changes and repairs, the maintenance on the vehicle is what, just like with the home maintenance, a lot of people don't take into account. Car is a depreciating asset. You need to maintain it. I'll probably spend over $1,000 on my vehicle. I've got a 10-year-old Cadillac I bought coming off a lease. I've spent some money into it, but I like it, and I keep it maintained. And those are part of the cost of car ownership. And you can either set them aside. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Or when it pops up, you can act like it's an unforeseen act of God, a disaster, and we'll reach for the credit cards once again. Other things, out-of-pocket medical going down there. I can tell you a story about the next one down there, clothing. I had a talk with one of my counselors just the other day, and he'd been a counselor here for a couple of years, but he'd never seen anything quite like this, and I had to agree with him. This is very uncommon. Husband and wife came in, and he was kind of doing a marital counseling with them. They had kept their finances separate, and the husband couldn't figure out quite why the wife was having such a struggle with her credit cards. Come to find out, she was spending, guys, a little over $2,000 a month on clothing. And the husband was just aghast at that. You can imagine what kind of an explosion that caused, and no wonder I'm having this kind of problem. The counselor finally got her talked down, I think, to about $700 a month. She thought that was an undue hardship, and the husband still thought that was too high. So,
oh my God!
True story from recent session here.
Wow. Wow.
But the point is that women do spend more than men, and the average is about twice what the average man spends. And my wife will tell me that's well justified. So I'm not going to argue the point, but whatever that number is, whether it's they'll come in and they'll put almost nothing down. They've got a family of 5 or 6, and they're putting nothing down for clothing. And that's
even though that's not true. Yeah, that's not true.
It's not true. And so that needs to be identified. That's why this session takes some time, because you need to flesh out reasonable numbers for this. Out-of-pocket lunch expenses, meals out, entertainment. We're the most entertained generation of all time. I mean, and our hobbies and our entertainments are countless, and I remember doing a counseling session one night for a couple myself, and the guy was absolutely convinced that $15,000 bass boat was a necessity, and the wife wasn't so convinced that was the case. And so we had to have a session on the other end. That it was his bass fishing really an essential, or was getting his family finances under control and essential. So those kind of discussions need to go forward. And I tell people you can have some of it, you just can't have it all, and the credit cards make up the difference. And we've even got our, I don't approve of a lot of this, but we lay it out and we identify it, because oftentimes it's hidden. I call my vice category, Jerry. You see the alcohol, tobacco, and gambling category.
Right.
I've done a lot up through here, and apparently not very successfully, because Iowa has 20 casinos in its state borders now, to try to oppose legislated legalized gambling. Certainly tobacco and alcohol are a couple of other areas that fall into these categories. So you need to get them out there. They oftentimes will not readily admit to as much as is being spent. All right, so you lay out what you think is a reasonable budget. That's your first step. Now, here's the next step for anybody that's seriously interested in doing this. Track your finances, track your spending. For at least 30, and I prefer a period of 60 days, you're going to write out on paper, of course these days they've got the little the iPhones, what have you. There's all sorts of ways to do it, but you're going to record everything that you spend cash for or use the ATM machine for. And at the end of that period, you will be surprised and shocked at how much money is going for some of these areas that would be under the discretionary spending. All right, let's say, for instance, to complete this, that we've discovered, and Jerry, flip back to the have-tos and the want-tos. Okay, the envelope budgeting methods, which is where we're coming into. Let's say that we're looking at the clothes and the eating out on the want-tos. Now, certainly a certain amount of clothes are necessities, but just like the lady the other night spending $2,000 a month on her clothing, we're well past the point of essentials. And so you decide how much. Let's say instead of the $2,000 that she was spending, or maybe the couple hundred that you're spending, you're going to pare that down, and you're going to identify what's affordable for you on that. Maybe meals out. There's restaurants everywhere. I'm guilty as anybody of eating out more often than I should. We're all busy with kids and grandkids and jobs and activities and church activities and so forth. And so it's easy to pick up fast food or stop at a restaurant for a treat. But you're going to identify what's affordable in those kind of things. You're going to look ahead at Christmas, where the average family spends $1,000 a year on Christmas gift giving alone. You're going to start putting money into some envelopes. One will be earmarked for clothing. One will be for meals out. One will be for Christmas, movies, golf, hobbies. The vacation I mentioned that we're looking at, we're putting money aside for those kinds of things. And so now you have those things allotted. If your clothing envelope is empty, you're going to defer buying that new pair of shoes or the new jacket you want. Your eating out envelope is empty. You're not going to be eating out until you've plugged that money back into it. And every payday, now you're going to actually take cash, because it's important to see it, to feel it, to make it a very intentional part of your life. And I can't overemphasize this as you're trying to get a handle on your finances, how important some of those things are. Now, the envelopes on the have-tos. I mentioned automobile maintenance, home maintenance, and things like that. It's important that you're plugging money in there too. Again, otherwise the credit cards are going to come back out. Most of us have access, most adults that I speak to have access to credit cards, and they're misused as much for these kinds of things as anything you can imagine. The car breaks down, house needs something, or I just consistently overspend on my discretionary spending because I never had a budget and I had no idea what I could really afford. If it felt good, I did it, and the excess rolled to my credit cards. That's the kind of accidental financial living that so many people do in this country. They get them into trouble, and they never get to the point that, Jerry, you want them to get to so they can enjoy the fruits of their labor.
I want to bring Jennifer on for a minute, Jennifer, because we've been doing this. We have been doing it on food, where we have a certain amount for food, and when that is gone, then it's whatever's left in the house is what we eat. And we've been trying to do be very diligent about that. We've also done that on we've also done that on something else. I'm trying to remember now. It's food and. What is the other thing we've done that on? I'm trying to think. Maybe you don't know either. But
now, Jennifer, are you one of these ladies spending a couple $1,000s a month on clothing?
Well, when I met Jerry, I realized that I didn't need to go to the mall. Because that didn't fulfill me anymore. So that actually isn't a problem in our house. But I will say, as far as one area of the budget that we just kind of found ourselves not really going crazy with, but just not really sticking to a certain amount every month, was just our groceries and our eating out. And so what we did, what Jerry was talking about, is we took an envelope and we said, okay, we're going to put half of our budget in cash, because just as you were talking about, Tom, having it in your hand, tangible, the money, not just as a credit card, it's just very valuable in how you perceive it. We take half of it and we say, this is going to last us from the 1st to the 15th. Then we put the rest of it in on the 16th, and that lasts us till the end of the month. And one thing that we found really helps us with that, and we like to stay on a strict budget. We like to save our money and have a big profit rate, like Jerry was talking about earlier. One thing that we found helps us with that is just planning. That's been the biggest factor in sticking to the budget and really saving more money and being able to do more investments and different things with our money, is planning. When we make a menu, for example, we tend to
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I mean, we'll sit down.
To stick to the menu rather than going out to eat because we were too busy that day.
Yeah, and Jennifer's a great cook. She's a great cook, and what we'll do is we'll sit down and say, okay, let's make this meal, Monday, this meal Tuesday, this week, and we go to the store and we buy what's on that list to make that stuff, and that's it, And so we really stay. You know what the other thing was, Jennifer? It was Christmas. Christmas, which can be the downfall of so many people. I mean, so many people, and I'm sure you see that, Tom, people coming in in January.
Well, the interesting thing, what you just said about Jennifer, and it is just axiomatic. It is part of human nature. Christmas, if a kid gets 20 gifts on Christmas morning, he doesn't appreciate much of any of them. If he gets a few, he appreciates them much more. If, as adults, let's say you had your eye on an outfit and you wanted that, but instead of going out and buying it, you had to put money aside for the next, 6-8 weeks, and then went to get it. The anticipation of that makes you enjoy that item much more. If you and Jerry plan all week and talk about going out to dinner and a movie, you're going to enjoy that a lot more than if you just did it on the spur of the moment and you didn't make any sacrifices. You made a choice. I wasn't going to play that round of golf and do this, but instead I chose to do this. Or I put the money aside and I sacrificed for vacation. Again, the anticipation will increase the enjoyment of that activity or that item, whatever it is.
So true. Yeah, great point.
That is. And, back to the Christmas idea, too, just real quickly before I forget, because we need to move on, is that, one of the things we decided to do is we began to realize that Christmas was just costing way too much. And that's not even what Christmas is about, And so we decided this year, and we're going to have to commit to this. We're really going to try to do this. But we're going to make every gift that we give away. We're choosing not to give money to the corporations, not to give. We're going to make our gifts. And, some people may say, well, I don't want to get a gift from you then, Robinson. Well, I think it really, it's really the thought that counts. And we plan on making, food items and different things like that, making things. I just think getting back to that kind of mentality is really where America needs to go. We've become so consumer driven. We've become so driven by giving money to corporations. And it's that consumption trap that we've been talked into through the 500 plus marketing messages that we receive each and every day as we get into our car and see the billboards and listen to the radio and see the TV. And we're walking around zombified, ready to whip out our credit cards for virtually anything because we're told that's how we find happiness. And it's just not how it works. And that's why so many people are in debt. But I tell you what, Jennifer,
Amen. Amen.
Jennifer, this has really been a good thing to the envelope system. If anybody listening to us has used the envelope system or has any comments on that or ideas, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Here's the FICO scores, Tom. People often talk about these.
Well, and this is where I want to wrap at least my prepared discussion up. This is where I kind of wrap up my PowerPoint. It's important, and this is one of the things that I know there's some disagreement on, and without mentioning names, there are some Christian financial counselors that think you can just live off the grid, pay off the credit cards, close them all down, and don't worry about the credit report or the credit score. Well, most people's lives don't quite work that way. There are areas that the good credit report and the good credit score enter into it, and it isn't just for borrowing money. It also comes into play oftentimes when you're getting different types of insurance. The insurance underwriters look at the credit reports and the credit score. And the last thing, and this is oftentimes the most important thing, especially in a tough job market, many of the potential employers are looking at the credit reports and the credit scores as a means to sort you out from other applicants. Some of these jobs, they have an incredible number of applicants. It's not like the tight job market was a few years ago. There's a lot of people wanting these jobs right now. And so, in fact, I had a man come up, talked about his sister who had been with his company for a number of years and wanted this advancement. Couldn't get it because she had messed up her credit, and as part of the advancement, they went back and checked her credit report out. She'd messed up her credit, didn't get the advancement. And so this is not just something inconsequential that you can just forget about. Many of these people, this is a very vital thing that they need to keep an eye on. The Fair Isaac Credit Organization, which is still the preeminent credit model that is used for the credit scoring, is FICO, Fair Isaac Credit Organization, and here's the scoring model up in front of you. Now, there are two places that you can go if you want to get to something to write down. To get a copy of your credit report, you can go online to annualcreditreport.com. annualcreditreport.com, and you can get a copy free of charge from one of the three major credit bureaus. There are three, and you can get it from any one of the three major credit bureaus. The credit score, which is what we're looking at here, is something different. Now, it is derived from one of those three major credit reporting bodies, and it can differ quite a bit. I wrote a piece a few years ago for a financial firm, and in their newsletter they wanted me to write about credit scores. I did the research on my own, got the access, and I found that there was 40-point swing difference, high to low, on the three credit bureaus that were offering the score. And here's the range. It runs from 300 to 850 with the national average, and it varies a little bit on the geographical area and the time, and in recent times it has actually depreciated since the market bubble burst. And there's some reasons for that. And one of the things that that I get asked, and when we're on the subject of credit scores, is will going into a debt repayment program with your firm, will that have an impact on the credit score. And since we don't get directly involved, I can't make any promises, but I can tell you this. I have seen a number of credit scores and stories coming into our office, and I have had them at times come to me and show me what was going on before and after. And I've never seen one yet that entered into the repayment program that we administer, pay on a regular basis, and end up paying off that didn't significantly increase their credit score. Now, the reason for that is this. The regularity of the payments is a big part of what's going in. You see the payment history, 35%. The amount owed is in here, and the credit reports are reflecting to some degree the debt-to-income ratio and also the utilization rates. The utilization rates, what has suffered many of the scores in this time, for a period of time, for many years. Jerry, you know that we saw an expanding credit model, and every time you turned around, your credit card companies wanted to expand your limits. You had a $5,000 limit, they want to take you to $7,500 or $10,000, and it kept expanding. And I've seen some incredible stories of people that intentionally kept taking and taking and taking. We went the other way, as I mentioned, after the bubble burst in '08, and we started to see a lot of red ink at the credit card companies. They started shrinking those down,
right?
And they started bringing them down. And so, for instance, people that were carrying a $3,000 balance on a $10,000 limit were only using 30% of the utilization was only 30%, and that was fine. But when that line came from 10,000 to 5,000, now they're at 60% with that same 3,000, and that started negatively impacting on their credit score. So we bring that down, we regulate the payment, and the debt-to-income ratio, how much money you make and how much total debt you carry, and they look at a line on a credit card. If you've got a $10,000 balance, and even if you never use it, they assume that you're carrying that much debt, and so the debt-to-income ratio may be a problem, and that needs to be brought back into balance too. So those things are all impacted as you repay through the program, and I've never seen one yet that didn't successfully pay off, that didn't significantly, in some cases, take it from, say, a high 5 to a low 6 on up close to maybe a high 7. I've seen some of those. So significant changes, and you can see on the next screen that you just popped up is the FICO score as it relates to the interest rate. Going back to the issue of you want to borrow money, now you drop much below that 620 that you're seeing on the screen, and you won't find a lot of people wanting to loan you money at all. But if, on the other hand, you're in the mid to upper 7s, pushing at 800, you're a good credit risk, and the cost of the money. Now, some people say, well, why is that? Well, if I'm a lender, it's just like consider, I mentioned gambling earlier, a handicapper at the horse track. They're looking at 2 horses. One wins almost every time they open the chute up. The other nag hardly finishes. In this case, if I'm the credit scoring model, I'm going to give the one that wins most of the races about an 8 to 825 score. The nag that hardly finishes will probably get about a 500, and that's what the lenders are doing. They're handicapping you, and they're saying you've got an excellent chance to repay in a timely and as called for fashion. The other guy, not so sure of it all, and that's why the cost of the money is significantly different one to another, and it's very justified.
Yeah, it looks like when you go below the 660 level, it really begins to jump pretty high. I was just kind of noticing that. It looks like the 660 level is really the kind of the cutoff for where it starts to grow exponentially as opposed to just kind of creeping.
And you also saw in the earlier one around 675 was the national average at the time that was put together. So you can see as you start to drop below the average, the cost of money goes up dramatically. And again, some of your cost of insurance will go up if you can get insurance at all. If you're a bad enough risk, they may not want to write you at all. And that job application may not be within your grasp either. And some people argue, well, that's not fair. But I will tell you that there's good underlying reasons why a large employer, especially a bank or an insurance company, wants to hire somebody that handles their finances responsibly versus someone that doesn't.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions here. Alan had written in, he said he was not going to be able to be here for the whole thing, and he did have to leave. I've got 2 questions from him. Jennifer, if you have any questions from the audience, we'll take those as well. I'll start with these 2. And I'll just say to the folks out there, if you're listening, if you have any questions for Tom and you want to ask him now, feel free. Tom, here's the very first one. Alan says, how can I improve my credit score? He said that he had a really bad credit card deal that went down, and it really jacked up his credit, and he said he wants to improve his credit score. What are just some basic things he can do?
Well, without him being on the line, and of course in a situation like this, you wouldn't want to ask a lot of personal questions, and maybe that's why a counselor like the ones I have on staff here are good, because they can get into the details. His situation, he may have opportunities. He may be married or unmarried. There may be some opportunities with a spouse, perhaps a family member, or a parent, something that he could generate some additional new lines of credit. Time alone will eventually mitigate much, and then eventually all of this, because the negatives that come on, like he's talking about, he had a bad situation. He didn't say how long ago that was, did he?
He said it was about 6 months ago.
So, oh, that's very fresh. And again, without being able to get him on the line, and then we wouldn't want to do that in an open forum, talk about some of the details. Maybe we could come up with some further ways to mitigate this, but and some people will tell you write a letter of explanation on the credit report. You can write up to a 100-word explanation if you have a side to tell here. But how much of an impact that will have on the score is pretty negligible. Usually that does not impact on the score. It may impact on the willingness of a particular lender to take you to the next level. Oh, there's a story here, and allow you to open it up. So much of it's automated that you're not going to get there anyway. 7 years is the date that the thing gets totally removed. But in the meantime, you can build up some new credit, sometimes get a cosign loan, do some things that you can take some baby steps, and each area of new credit and new step that you take will further mitigate the increasingly old and aging negative that you have. And if it's an aberration, an anomaly, something that sticks out and it's not within the rest of your credit pattern, there is a willingness on some part of some lenders to overlook it. There's also a move, I will tell you, on a national level to make a medical debt, especially one that's been paid off, not negatively reflected on your score. A lot of people have had their credits banged pretty hard by some old medical bills that in some cases even been paid off. I agree with that. I don't think that's totally fair, but that is the world we live in as it sits right now.
Okay, I've got another question here from Bob, and he asked the question. He's been getting harassed by student loan collectors. These are federal student loans, and apparently he's getting harassing calls from a company that is not the federal government. Obviously, I guess it's been outsourced or something. He's getting these harassing calls about his federal student loans, and he cannot pay them. Is that something you can help him with?
Well, we can talk to him. There are some things he can do in writing, to go to them under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act and say, in essence, I don't want to be contacted anymore. 805C3, if my memory serves me, of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. And if you get into that area, if you make the thing in writing, and I usually tell people to put it on a certified letter, return receipt requested, so you have it, you keep a copy of it. Collection agencies then are restricted from continuing to contact you. Now, what you are doing is you're dead-ending them. You're saying, I'm not going to talk to you, and you're prohibited by law from continuing to contact me on this debt. Now, of course, they can sue you, get a judgment, start executing the judgment, which oftentimes is a garnishment of wages if your state law will allow for it, attaching a bank account. So you really ought to consult a professional before you go too far down that road to look at the potential ramifications. It's a good question, and unfortunately, Jerry, and I think you know this, some of your listeners may not, federally insured student loans do not void bankruptcy, and it allows them to get a much tougher handle on you than normal unsecured debts would be.
Yeah, you just can't wipe them out. It's one of those things. Okay, let's see. I have a couple of other questions that are coming in, but before I go to those, why don't you explain real quickly, Tom, how this process exactly works one more time for those?
Good.
Because you have a free hour consultation that we're advertising here. What does that mean? Is that a bait and switch? What's that all about?
If somebody in your audience wants to take the next step, let's say they think they need a better handle on their finances, and they've got some of these debts, credit cards, medical bills, those kind of debts, that they think they could use some direct assistance with, this is where we can come in. If they will come in, they'll sit down, not physically probably, but they'll do it over the phone, and the process is essentially the same. They'll fill out that information sheet we looked at earlier, give them the income, the listing of the debts, the listing of the expenses in detail, and they'll sit down with the counselor for roughly an hour, go through that in some detail, and I say nobody goes through that without benefiting to some degree. Now, in about 30% of the cases, they end up signing up and agreeing to have us directly assist them in the repayment of those debts, to get their payments lowered, get the interest lowered may be the biggest factor, get them re-aged, get them back up to a current status if they're a little bit behind. But the lowering of the interest makes it seem, since you're only making one payment instead of 6, 8, or 10, a bill consolidation loan. It makes it seem like a good one because maybe the aggregate interest rate on those cards has been dropped from upper teens to maybe single digits, maybe 6, 8% on some of those cards, some of them lower than that. And so over a period of time, that same kind of money they're putting into the repayment of their debts goes much more to the principal. You mentioned the term principal in the early part of our webinar. Much more towards the principal, much less towards the interest, and since that kind of interest is not deductible on your taxes and hasn't been since the 70s, there's not really any benefit to paying, especially in this environment, a high interest debt. The debts are closed down. They will be repaid over a period of time. You're building your credit back up. You're eventually getting to the point that you're going to become debt-free, and we're going to assist you in that. Now, one of the things also, Jerry, that we do for anybody that you refer to us, we typically will take, as part of our cost, a $50 upfront setup fee. And we charge a monthly fee in addition to that. People say, what do you charge? Well, we go from 0 to a maximum of $39 with an average of $20 a month fees. We also would charge you $50 setup fee, but for your people, we waive that. We want them to have every opportunity that they can to get free counseling and no-cost initial induction into the program. And so we do that for you, and I'm happy to do it for any of your people that are listening now or come to us later.
Okay, so it's the $50 fee is completely waived, and then from that point on, it's about $20 a month. Now, so they're drowning in debt, or they're facing some debt, or maybe they're not drowning in debt, but they have a debt that they say, you know, I want to get some help with this thing. Are you able to lower what they're paying, or when they come to you, should they expect to be paying a little less than what they're paying so they can get some relief?
Generally, I will tell you in all honesty, sometimes it's a little less, but generally it's in that ballpark. Let's say the average client that we have is paying about $400 a month on unsecured debts. It's generally, after they go through the plan, it might be a little more, might be a little less. It's going to be in that ballpark. The biggest advantage is that interest rate. If the average interest rate on credit cards today is in the upper teens, and I believe it is, and the average one on our program is more like in the single digits, and it varies from one card to another, and I'm not going to get into any specifics. That's too complicated. But if the average is significantly less and they're paying the same money, then the time frame, just like we showed before on that slide that showed the money going in larger increments to pay off the credit card debt, instead of 9 years, it takes less than 3. We shave, in some cases, years off the repayment. And so these people learn discipline, they learn to handle their money, they get the direct assistance of those concessions. And when I get asked, why do the credit card companies give you the concessions and they won't give them to me? Because they know that we're going to treat all of them fairly and equally, and we're going to require the closing of those cards. And that's why instead of, okay, this credit card company may give you a concession for a short period of time, but he might not give you the long-term concessions or as good a concessions as we're going to get, because you're agreeing to give up the use of the cards and get your finances in order. They're expecting down the road for you to be a more responsible paying customer, they're not altruistic. That's part of their motivation. They want you as a long-term productive customer, not one they have to write off.
Okay, I'm talking with Tom Coates. He is the Christian Debt Coach, christiandebtcoach.org, 877-366-5158. He's made a generous offer of waiving the $50 fee. If you'd like to speak with him, you get a free hour consultation, helping you set up a budget, helping you set up living expenses and how to pay them, an envelope system, and also helping you if you have debt that's a little bit uncontrollable and you just need a little bit of help. He can help you with that and help you get your credit score hopefully back to a place where it's manageable. No promises there, obviously. No one can ever promise you to help you with that, but he can certainly help you based upon his experience. Jennifer, do we have any more questions? Do we have any other comments that we need to bring up? Because we're about 2 minutes away from being at the end.
Yeah, just a couple of comments, which I thought were helpful. Damon says that my wife and I use the envelope system for auto fuel, groceries, and piano lessons for the kids. Also, we allocate $100 per month to pay miscellaneous unplanned expenses. And finally, we give ourselves an allowance for personal purchases. And he says using cash really makes you think twice before spending. And that's a great note, Damon. That's so true. And then Sharon says that she has a daughter and son-in-law that might be interested in help from Tom, but they live in Hawaii. Tom, do you help people anywhere in the U.S., or how exactly does that work?
We do have clients in Hawaii. There are some states that we don't do business in, Jennifer. You and I have talked about this. There are some states that have stringent requirements, large bonding requirements. The vast majority we do. There are a few that we don't, but the vast majority of states in this, there are only 50 states, if I recall, not the other number. The 50 states, I think we're in 37 or 38 of those 50 states. So Hawaii is one of those, and we'd be happy to give you a quick rundown if you want to check with us on what we're in and what we're not.
And everything's done by mail and by internet, I guess. I mean, by phone and by internet, I mean.
That's exactly right. The technology today makes the delivery system on everything a little easier than it used to be. But we try to make it as easy as possible for people. And if expediting paperwork's important, we FedEx it a lot of times too.
Tom, I know that you have stayed up pretty late for this. I really appreciate you being here. I know you've been very helpful with all this information. We plan on bringing you back and doing another webinar soon, maybe in the next few months, and we'll do an update on this and talk about some other things. And I know people would certainly be doing themselves a favor if they have some debt that's unsecured, credit card debt, medical debt, or just like Sharon had said, if you have, if you know somebody who is in debt and they need help, here is a person that you can trust. He's a nonprofit organization, been doing it for about 25 years, and is faith-based. 877-366-5158. That's christiandebtcoach.org on the web. Tom, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jerry and Jennifer. I've enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to doing it again sometime.
All right. Thanks a lot.